just because I talk first doesn't mean it's the best idea. And in that strength assessment, really one of the things it taught me is how to keep my mouth shut and let my team talk and really understand and know what's going on. I think that just really being curious about all those things, figuring out the landscape with you and your team is so important. And for directors, the same would be true with your board. Sometimes you just have to zip your mouth because they come with the voice of their communities, with their experiences, with their questions, and all of those things are important. I think now in my 4th year in my director's role, just being quiet is probably one of the strengths I'm getting a little bit better at finally.
Part of my mission of this podcast is to help people understand the various structures and nuances that each province has. I have admittedly not done as much work in my home province of Saskatchewan as I would like, and even my own knowledge around some of those leadership structures aren't as clear. However, today I solve much of that as I've invited on Director of Northeast School Division and President of Leeds in Saskatchewan, Stacy Lair. And Stacy was gracious enough to give me some of her time in just helping me understand that particular structure. And for those of you from other provinces, you will recognize certainly some similarities, but also perhaps some differences in the way they operate. But beyond that, I just really getting to know her more and her personality. And I would also sort of suggest there's something very similar in some of our leaders in the more rural areas. I guess there's more of a sort of a community vibe to them, if you will. And, it makes sense, right? The one thing that I think is also very interesting about Stacy's career is that she began as an industrial arts teacher. That is not something that I have come across very often who have made that kind of transition to leadership roles. So that's fascinating. She's very humble in her approach, but also at the same time has a lot of confidence in the work that she's doing. And I'm just so grateful to be able to introduce all of you to Stacy Lair.
I work in all different provinces, and I know how all the superintendents / directors have their own organization. So tell me about Leeds. What is Leeds, and kind of how would you sort of describe it to somebody else?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you said, many of the provincial and territorial organizations, Saskatchewan has an entity of the League of Educational Administrators, Directors, and Superintendents of Saskatchewan, that mouthful. So what we are, though, is a professional organization, association, and we're a legislated regulatory body. So we have the Leeds Act that legislates us, and our mandate is both to uphold professional standards, support ethical leadership, and ensure that our senior administrators are qualified, accountable, that continuous growth aspect. So essentially, we're a regulatory body, but with those dual roles of accreditation of our professional responsibilities.
So how would that differ from the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation? Obviously a different audience, but in terms of their sort of mandate and because that's how as a member of the STF for years, I just would see Leeds as that's your version of our Teachers Federation as teachers.
Yeah. Well, I think different legislation, right? And so we have a professional regulatory obligation, and that regulatory obligation for the STF lives outside of the Federation. So in Leeds, it lives right within our organization, and we have a standing committee for a discipline committee, professional ethics portion of that, for example, as well as our accreditation. So our Leeds members, under the Act, we maintain accreditation annual commitments of that, and that is adjudicated through another standing committee as well within our organization. So I think what sets us apart from the STF and perhaps too from other provinces, because it's my understanding that some are starting to take care of their own accreditation, but for the most part, provinces that lives outside the organization, outside that adjudication, that regulatory obligation, lives outside of their organization. When in Saskatchewan, it does not. It's right within Lead's organization.
And as yeah, because I was going to ask you about that differ between CASA and BCSSA and code and all the different iterations of this structure. But so it sounds like that's the key difference, being that you're really focused on, or the accreditation is really an in-house kind of
Yeah.
experience that may not be true. Yeah, and I mean, the other curiosity, of course, and we talked a little bit about before we press record, as a director of education in Saskatchewan, you sort of have this dual role. So how do you try to manage both of them, and what does the Lead's presidency necessarily entail from a day-to-day or just ongoing work?
Yeah. So whoever, a superintendent or director that takes the position of the president, runs it off the side of their desk, right? Like many of those other voluntary
Yeah.
elected positions. And so it does take a bit of time and commitment, but I think that is really strongly reinforced by the amount of professional relationships and those links that you make throughout Canada, have the opportunity sometimes internationally and even within the province to strengthen those professional ties is really significant benefit. Leeds has a president-elect and a president, so in a sense, it's a 2-year term, so you sort of have 1 year, supporting the president's role, which for me was last year, and now this year in the president's role and a president-elect along with me. So lots of sharing. Another significant support, the most, I think, in the organization would be our executive director, Ben Gerbinski. So Ben's role is really the day-to-day, the operational portion. So if you compare it to a school division, we are the elected folk and Ben does the operational. He's the operations side of things, just like a board would do of
Right.
education would be the elected, and it's sort of divided that way. And so I think too, in terms of anyone thinking of joining an organization, just experiencing the modeling of that really good practice of dividing governance from the management side of things and keeping
Right.
those operations straight, you really get to work through and stumble through that initially a bit together. And Ben
Hmm.
has done an excellent job in Saskatchewan of modeling of best practice and all of those things. So it's really been a significantly beneficial experience.
And it makes me think about sort of leadership in general and maybe shifts of the way we do things. Because I think in terms of boards of educations and trustees, there has been over the last, and I don't know, maybe it's 20 years, maybe less, more of a governance model. That wasn't always the case, right? I mean, trustees were oftentimes in the weeds, if you will, and sort of that can be good, that can be bad, but generally speaking, it's probably best if they serve that sort of more high level piece. But when you think about leadership, just generally speaking, and again, I want to talk a little bit about your career in a moment, but you think your trajectory of the things you've done, like, how do you think leadership, just generally speaking, in education has changed in the last, whatever, 20, 25 years, whatever you want to look at?
I think the underpinning has always been that relationship piece, listening, learning, leading with purpose for folks. But I think that now it's a little bit different because it's a really intuitive, it was an intuitive truth. So it just kind of was subtly there, but it's an
Right.
explicit expectation now. So I think it's a really positive change in that sense because there's clarity for the leader and for those in the organization as well around relational trust and all of those pieces. And so really being familiar with maybe what some of the professional goals and obligations in your role. And so I think that has been something that's been a positive change for sure. A little bit of a complex change, I think, is the pace. So lots of issues, but the pace of that coming out is a little bit different and seems to be escalating over the course of the few decades I've had in education. And I was thinking about where does that come from? How do things change in that way? And I think the acceleration in some ways stems from the speed of communication. So when you think about everyone's awareness um, of things, now we're at a time where perhaps thoughtful discourse isn't part of that awareness. And people come up with rapid calls to action, sometimes generated perhaps by social media sound bites and whatnot. And
Sure.
they don't have a shared understanding behind those sound bites. So there's a lack of story, there's a lack of discourse behind that. And then we as leaders are left to sort of stumble through to manage that chaos in some ways. So, having said that, though, we're also in a time when we manage that of the most educational research that we've had. That understanding is the best that we've had in the past, and so I think part of the pressure of it is balancing sort of that those random calls of actionable items that are coming without maybe an informed knowledge with the pressures, those pressures with the wisdom that we know what matters from research and the
Mm.
care, the clarity to do all of those and navigate that. I think that really stems the pressure of the pace of everything.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of that social media. And then the sort of the last link to that is because we can, because it's expected, the communication back out to our field, to externally, to the community, to our parents, to stakeholders, that is expected at a rigorous pace as well. And so we need to try and help build understanding, but knowing that people are just expecting those sound bites. So,
Right.
how do we create those opportunities for discourse, for true understanding, how to tell the story of public education? It's difficult, but I think it needs to be really thoughtfully done.
Yeah. I mean, I love where you're going with this because it resonates with me. And I mean, I think obviously just even things we talk about speed, right? Like the idea that when I send you a text message, I expect you to respond like right away,
Yeah.
right? Like we never used to have that, right? If there was an issue, I, whatever, you could leave a phone call and maybe a message or whatever. And the expectation was never that you would respond within that day. Nobody even thought of that. So to your point, that made it difficult for even to train yourself to say, I don't have to answer this right away because I actually need time to think about it. So pointing that out, I guess what I'm curious about is do you or have you instituted any practices and or strategies
Mm.
that would at least shift the culture somewhat? Again, you get it. Like when there's a crisis, you have to respond. You can't be silent on it. But I don't know that what you're saying is that people weren't, they were silent. They just may not have been, they just gave themselves more time, if you will, to, all right, let's think about this before we respond. Like, I'm just wondering if there's anything you do either personally or as an organization that would, in a sense, slow it down a little
Yeah.
bit.
But I think we have a significant luxury in the division office. The senior leaders have a luxury of being able to slow it down a little bit. We don't ever need to, somebody calls really upset. We can give ourselves a window to be able to find out and to be able to dig into the issue. And so we have a deep understanding of what's happening as well and talk to them and back and forth. Whereas I think sometimes our educators, sometimes our school administrators don't have that same luxury because they often would have someone right there. Whereas we're spread out, my someone might be 50 miles away and they are not often in my office with me, whereas it's a little bit different. But I think just being really transparent, is and thinking ahead would be a huge strategy around transparency. So what can we share and how can we share it in very different ways, different
Mm.
times, 7 ways, 7 times, and how can we get that message out of things coming up is something that capacity is a bit of an issue always, I think, for school divisions to find the capacity to do those things. but to take that. And then I think for our schools to share an expectation with families, and that's something actually that's in our communication strategic plan for the next few years, how to let folks know that our teachers need some boundaries. We have some
Yeah.
educational tools that have responses that look like instant messaging, but if you send your child's teacher, a text message through there at 9 p.m., you, or equally at 9:30 a.m., you probably aren't going to get an instant response. If you have an
Yeah.
emergency, you need to pick up the phone and call the school. Those kinds of expectations and things, because bless their hearts, our teachers will respond all the time. And they will. So even if we could block those kinds of messages just with an auto response, those kinds of things are something I don't think we've done yet, but we need to do quickly because our folks, they're on all the time.
Yeah.
And I think you can only give back what you have left to give, and we're taking too much. And so I
That's
think
right.
that's really important to look at.
And I know lots of schools, boards, organizations institute a no weekend interaction.
Yeah.
So you now that and what I like is that doesn't preclude you if you're a person who actually likes to work on Saturday because of whatever, you can still do all that stuff and you can set the little scheduling to not hit the person's inbox until Monday or whatever that is, so that you're still have autonomy of your own time, but also you're not imposing your schedule and expectations on someone else. And so like I guess I want to just sort of leave this here. We haven't solved this one, but I want to leave this as a really important conversation to be had
Mm,
amongst our educators
yeah.
in terms of what are the things we can do culturally
Yeah.
to slow it down, because everybody wants it to be slowed down. And again, that's difficult when you're dealing with parents who they don't necessarily run by the same rules as you do or operate, but you want to be able to be clear around we'll solve it. And again, like to your point, I remember when I was teaching elementary school and the number of decisions and things you had to make in an hour were insane, right? Like when the other kid gets punched in the face, you don't get a day to think about this. You actually have to act now
Yeah.
and respond, right?
Yeah.
In some way. And that you get into that kind of mode of where kids are pretty demanding in terms of and you've got to respond. But as adults and as a culture, that's I think a really important and I'm gonna you've just sparked some thinking for me to be able to inquire and ask more of the people that I speak with, like, how do you slow it down? What
Yeah.
are you doing intentionally? But
Yeah.
you've called out a really interesting
Yeah. I think it
uh,
was my second day of my superintendent role when one of my colleagues, Mark, he said to me, you don't ever have to respond like immediately, like just that, and he just in 30 seconds sort of pointed out the kinks and just noticed it. That I was definitely in school mode, had just come from a really
yeah.
busy elementary school. And so just that difference is significant if anyone's transitioning from one role to the next. It's yeah, I don't think it can be understated for sure.
So let me see how well I did my research, and you could correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like, am I correct in assuming that you actually have a degree or in industrial arts? Is that
I
kind of been a
do.
was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how did that's an interesting one. First of all, as a female, just gender roles aren't typically that way, especially if you go back to when you got that degree.
Yeah.
So how did that sort of come about? And then how did that sort of morph into the next phase of your career that wasn't necessarily in, and I don't even know if you, how much you taught in that area
Yeah.
or
7
what?
years actually I taught in
Nice.
the shop. Yeah. Yeah. So in high school, I'm the daughter of a farmer, of a settler, and when when I was in high school, I dropped French because my dad wanted me to be a teacher because every farmer wants their child to grow up with a dental plan when they're older. I was never going to be a teacher, and I said, and I don't know why, because my mom had been in education, had a fantastic experience, but I was just a stubborn kiddo, I guess. and so wasn't going to. Had a couple jobs after high school, had a gap year, and went to, his name was Dale, this random career counselor in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. I think he worked for SciAst at the time. I don't even remember. Did an interest survey. And he said to me, "Did you ever think of teaching?" And I said, I had been working in some carpentry and doing some shingling and working and building some houses and shops and whatnot. And he just introduced like putting those two interests together that I had. And yeah, it fit really nice. I last left though, and my heart was in grade 1. So I
Oh,
covered the
yeah.
gamut from industrial arts to middle years.
Yeah.
A senior math is something that no one should want me to teach their children senior math, but kind of touched on everything else and really enjoyed early years. Reading literacy is just an amazing thing to watch. Kids, those students come in and really wire their brains right in front of you so that they can be fluent readers is something amazing that everyone should get to see. So I think that if I have a stressful week, you'll find me in someone's kindergarten or grade 1 classroom in the school division.
Mm. I taught grade 1 for my first 7 years, and it was a delight. It was only probably as I got older, my patience began less. And it was part also because my own kids were of that age, and I was like, that's too much. Like, I can't
Yeah.
spend 24 hours with 7-year-olds is like a lot. So I needed a bit of a break out of that.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
can.
and the mistake that I made is, had I written down the things that they said that were just amazing, I would have had a great book. I mean, I have a handful of stories, but it would just get to the point where like every day they would say something like, that is amazing.
I know.
And I took it for granted after a while. That was my mistake.
Yeah, and it's just all students. I enjoy all ages, but just the
There's an innocence there
you
and
know,
a
yeah.
wonder that's just,
And so excited about everything. It's
yeah,
just the
yeah,
best day ever every day.
yeah. And having grandkids in and around that
Uh,
age, we can have the best day ever, but also the same day can be the worst day ever, like in 2 seconds.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of
They give
shifting
it
and
all to you.
moving, that is for sure.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So again, kind of thinking about in your trajectory in leadership, and again, this is another little quote that I read. You said that people should lead in a way that fits who you are. We've kind of talked a little bit about some of your probably, I don't know, biases or whatever around how you think people should communicate and respond. So like when you think about that sort of idea of authentic leadership and leading in a way that fits who you are, I think, I don't know, when I spoke in CASA, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned the fact that leadership is, you can't define it as like, this is what because we're all different. So when you think about sort of leading with who you are and setting the stage, like what does that actually look like in an authentic kind of way, like, that needs to be called out?
I think what interests me is how much time I spend thinking about that. And if I am not necessarily leading it, you spend a lot of time, I think, when you start a new role, whether it's a superintendent role or a change of portfolio of the superintendent or your director role, or even differences in your portfolio between you and the superintendents, in thinking about your credibility and are you putting things forward in the right way? A lot of time in that, I think. And so then you kind of shift in after that. For me, the next phase was to making sure that you're leading authentically to yourself and being yourself, because I think we're all chosen for our leadership role because we are who we are. And it
That's
takes a
right.
long time to gain the confidence to own that, to lead in that way. And so I think that's a big deal. I know when I'm in interviewing principals, administrators, or superintendents in senior leaders, I think there's a small nuance of difference in folks and their leadership style, because why they wanted to go down that path changes a little bit. There's some who might have wanted to go down the path because they're distancing from classroom. They need a change or they need something that the area of the portfolio might interest them and they want to head in that way. And then on the other side, or sometimes closely related to that, there's folks who just are there to see the growth and the benefit to students in whatever domain. And they morph into leaders, not because they want to distance from that, but because they want to make a greater impact in the lives of learners. And I think that there's a bit of a subtle difference between those two kinds of style,
Mm.
but I'm sad a little bit every day to be this far from kids, from students. And so I think my leadership style is more in tune with, wanting to help and be servant in that way for students and staff. But I think that there's not that there isn't benefits to both styles, but it's it's taken me a while to realize I just have to in some way suck that sadness up and get over it because there's some strengths to that too, but that helps you sort of be authentic to your style as
Yeah.
well.
And I think again, not to overuse the framing of it because it sometimes gets overused, but this idea of what's your why and your purpose,
Sure.
and so that, as you pointed out, that might be different for everybody. It isn't necessarily the same. It doesn't have to be the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
And yet, I think where I'm curious about this notion of authentic self and authentic leadership is the fact that you at some point you end up coming to terms with the fact and that it may not be exactly what everybody wants. Like some people are looking for, and you just have to accept that. Like here as a teacher, as a leader, you're trying to be, and as schools, we try to be all things to all kids. That's a very audacious kind of goal and very difficult. But at the same time, recognizing that I think in the end, though, even if somebody isn't necessarily, you connect with them in the same way, your authenticity sort of is important because like, I just know that's how she or he responds. It might not be the way I want them to, but I'm not guessing. Like, I think it's the
Mhm.
worst thing is like, all of a sudden you change because like, you think you're trying to adapt to something. Wait, wait, that's not you. That's not what you normally do. What's going on? So I think there has to be some acceptance of it may not be everybody's vibe, and that's okay. But obviously, to your point, you got asked to do this role because a lot of people did like how you led and how you are as a person and as a leader. I don't know if that resonates at all.
Yeah. I think it does, but that equally on the other side of that, so there's a hiring committee that makes a decision and it could go one way or there's very small differences probably when you interview a pool of folks. I think you quite humbly I'm not going to do any better job than the person who was right beside me in the interview room
Sure.
who didn't get it. And so I think then that puts a little bit more responsibility on you that you need to really lead in the best way that you can.
But it's
And
still authentic.
yeah,
Like, it's still super authentic just to realize that like there's a self-awareness, right? Like I have certain skills that I think are helpful and useful, but I also know that there's
yeah,
things that I probably not so good at, but my colleague is really good at those. And I think that's what a good leader does is identify people who have strengths that you don't have.
yeah,
Says
yeah.
that they're
Wow.
great at that. And yeah. And this goes back to your original statement about the focus on the relationships, right? That doesn't happen really unless you have those really good relationships with your colleagues to be able to have those honest conversations, right? About yourself, about
Yeah,
others, and yeah.
yeah,
But it's in the end though, too, it's also a little bit messier, right? When everybody just sort of stayed in their lane, you just do your job, I'll just do
yeah,
my job. We don't have to talk. There's a simplicity to that, but also probably a lack of genuine
yeah.
effectiveness
When
again.
I
So
what we found is that the simplicity of that relates into chaos in the field. So when our senior team isn't really synergized and doesn't have our hands in each other's portfolio just a little comfortable bit or sometimes verging on uncomfortable, then we don't do a good job of synchronizing and understanding our impact or what impact is needed in terms of the work that we do for the field. And we have to be a bit messy in that. And that is really difficult. One of the things that I've had an opportunity to work a little bit with Patricia Prouse. She's in some executive coaching, and she did this really interesting strategy. It was a strength assessment. And so you do this and then you understand your strengths. And the reason why is because then you're aware, hyper aware sometimes of when you lean on your strengths, because that's leaving a whole other deficit in another area that people might need you to be. Or for me, some of those strengths meant that I was just stepping on people's toes. I have really quick ideations of things that I think are fantastic ideas, but just because I talk first doesn't mean it's the best idea. And in that strength assessment, really one of the things it taught me is how to keep my mouth shut and let my team talk and really understand and know what's going on. I think that just really being curious about all those things, figuring out the landscape with you and your team is so important. And for directors, the same would be true with your board. Sometimes you just have to zip your mouth because they come with the voice of their communities, with their experiences, with their questions, and all of those things are important. I think now in my 4th year in my director's role, just being quiet is probably one of the strengths I'm getting a little bit better at finally. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, that's, I mean, again, that all of that sort of speaks to this idea that if you're incorporating and allowing other people to speak and other voices to be heard, it slows it down because now we're
Yeah,
trying to think about a lot of different things, and you have to accept that that's part of this. It's going to take longer because we want to hear from more people and we want to be thoughtful and we want to come up with some sort of a shared response. That's not my response. It's our response. And the
yeah,
more you do that, but again, you're fighting this battle of, but that's taking too long. Tell us
yeah,
now what we have to do. It's like, no,
yeah,
we're not going to tell you now. Like, it's going to take a while. And education gets a lot of sort of bashes for being slow just to do everything, right? Like things take a long time, and that's just
yeah,
partly because we choose it to take a long time because we want voice to be heard. So
absolutely.
you've been in Northeast School Division for a while now. So tell me what you are most proud of. So if somebody has no familiarity with what you do and how you operate, and they said, "What I'm a teacher," maybe that's the lens I'll take. I'm thinking of applying for a job in Northeast School Division. Why in the world would I want to come work for you?
Fantastic. I have to say when I was in that same boat, so I was in Northern Saskatchewan at the time, and just I wanted a job in Northeast School Division, and so I lurked it until I could find it. And there was a couple reasons, and I'll list those. And the director at the time, I had some provincial leadership roles, and just the tone from himself, from Don Rumpel from the division, was just holding teaching in such a high regard. And working in a division like that is where I wanted to be. And so I think that's incredibly important because teaching is such an honored profession. And I hope that's something that folks who get to know me would pick up in my tone as well. But in terms of the division, long before I worked here and still continuing as a legacy and a commitment to shared resources, and specifically around sharing of rubrics, PAC curriculum. Our teachers are incredibly generous with their brain power. We pull them together when there's new curriculum and we unpack, we help curate and create rubrics, and then we post them all on Curriculum Corner for the province to use, as well as some other resources in there too. And so I think it's quite well known in Saskatchewan, or somewhat well known anyway. And it's a bit of a
Yeah.
legacy for a school division and a commitment that we'll maintain. So I know our teachers, you gain significantly from that unpacked work as well. And so we want to keep resourcing that for them for their professional development and collaboration. So that's one of them. A couple I have, if we have, I don't know, we might have to edit them if we run out of podcasts, but also mm, the well-being and engagement work we're doing is pretty significant. So this is fourth or fifth year. Sometimes some of the schools have dug in for a few more years into some self-regulation for students, starting first with some staff self-awareness and learning, some co-regulation, then classroom strategies. And now this year and a little bit last year, family awareness and what some shared languages around those sorts of things and the impact of that. And then I think the last one, just where we are with our RTI, with our response to intervention to support all learners. I think we have many years of a system-wide approach. We are continuously and will again pull some people when we talked about slowing down and those voices. That's exactly what we want to do again with RTI, to look at what that looks like and how can we refine and what approaches can help support our teachers in the work that they do even more. And so I think those are some of the things that stand out for me.
That's great. And I would just echo again from my tenure in Prairie South here in the province, knowing that, yeah, your curriculum corner and that resource sharing was always an ethos that your division has sort of fostered. And it's nice to know that that's a continuation and that's just how it is, right? It's such a supportive. And again, I think too, there's something to that, especially when you talk about school divisions with geographical challenges and fewer opportunities than perhaps other places to really sort of come together to share. And so I think that's a powerful testament to you. So kudos. I'd love to hear about a leadership challenge that maybe you faced over the last number of years. It could be anyway. You can go back as far as you want or more recently. Just a challenge that you really that sort of tested you. That, and again, it's sometimes when I ask people this question, it ends up going really well and sort of the ending is a great story. And sometimes it's like, it wasn't a great story, but there was still learning involved because that's what leadership is about. So is there a leadership challenge that sort of pops in your head around, yeah, that was tough. That was a tough one. And I learned a lot through that.
But I think over the course of from school administrator and superintendency and director, over the course of all of those things, there's been a common challenge. And it kind of goes with that strength analysis that I talked about before a little bit. But I think you have a blind spot if you're not intentional and reflect on where your strengths are. Everyone in a leadership role was promoted because they were good at that role that they were doing. And so then you shift into a new role and you're often not doing the same thing. So you're in an unfamiliar area. And it is sure darn easy to sneak back in and just do the same role you were doing, but a little bit more. And instead, you often have a new person who is doing that job. And so you're stepping on all those toes. And so just that shift that you need to make. And it seems pretty obvious, but I think the challenge is just you have to know that you're going to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to want to pull back into just doing more better of what you did before, but now and I can't remember the podcast I listened to, but it explained it really well that you're just in terms of educational leadership, you're the person who supports the people who teach the students. And so you're not teaching the students. And one of the hardest parts of my job is recognizing that I don't work with students directly. I'm the person who supports those people. And so am I doing it right? Am I doing a good job of where I need to be? And I have symbols of, if you see my hand motion, a hierarchy, but it's not that. It's just that you have to think about the fact that you're cascading things down to folks. And are you giving them the right cascade of what they really need? Or is it just what you think because that's what you did when you were there? So, and that I think you talked about the slow educational change. I think sometimes it's unintentionally slow because we just relive and cascade down what we did 20 years ago, which isn't good either. And so, just thinking about that challenge of be different because you're in a different role in a different spot.
That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. I like that. I like that one. And then last sort of question about leadership. I think about a general, again, make this general statement. Most people say yes, not everybody, but that we're in a bit of a leadership crisis, that there are fewer people, fewer quality candidates wanting to become leaders in education, but we want to encourage them. So when you look around in your schools and you see a young teacher in their 20s, they're early in their career, and you maybe either you identify the fact that, ooh, this person looks like they've got some leadership skills that they should consider, or maybe they've identified that themselves. What advice would you give to them by saying, all right, one day I want to be like Stacy and have that, maybe I want to be a director someday or a superintendent, principal, whatever. What would you tell them now?
I think one of the things that I constantly take for granted in my role is that I probably commit a little bit too much time in my job as opposed to my personal ambitions. But one of the balancing factors for that is my spouse. He is fantastic. He's a non-educator and he pulls me away from the education. He gives me a minute of conversation when I get home and then he kind of cuts it off in sometimes a less than
You want him
gentle
to.
way and said, okay, that's it. And to get out of that space. So that balance, I think, is one thing because often people who are contributors, they want to help and make a bigger impact, more for more students, more staff. They'll give too much of themselves and find a balance. And he helps me find that all the time. So I think that's an important advisement that's really outside of the role, but key. And then I think the other lens is just to stay curious is so important, to always wonder how things work, why they are the way they are, what could be better. And that growth lens is to get involved and to take risks. And for goodness sakes, when you make a mistake, just let folks know. Everybody can own their mistakes and be vulnerable in that way. And that lets the people around you really relate. And you talked about that relationship piece is that keys into all of those things. So stay humble, stay curious, and always
Yeah.
remember you're working for the service of learning. I think
Yeah.
it's pretty important.
But again, I appreciate your first call out there because it's not something that people say often. And it's something that can get away from you, right? The idea of giving yourself time and space just to be a person and not
Yeah.
always be on. And of course, as your leadership responsibilities grow, it's more and more difficult sometimes to do that one. Like you said, having a spouse or somebody that's going to say to you, all right, that's enough. You don't have to do this all day long. And it's important for you to, I mean, this speaks to the notion of well-being, obviously. And it's a hard job. I mean, I think you can't ever sugarcoat that and try to tell people, oh, it's fine. It's not hard. It's not fine. It's not easy. It's hard work.
Yeah.
So the sooner you build that into your life, even at 25, as a single person, whatever, the better you're going to be equipped to do this long term.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when those folks come out and into the classroom for the first time and they're around that and they start to put their hand up for teacher leadership roles in Saskatchewan, you and I are both in you go to the co-op or everywhere you go, you're going to run into whether you're a classroom teacher or a director.
Yeah.
Folks know and they want to talk about that with you. So it's really important to give yourself the space to be like, I can be just, I'm Stacy at home. And my family puts me in a nice humble spot of, you're not the boss
Sure.
of us in the director role like that, Mom.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. And that's good, and I need that, and so I've been really graced with that.
Awesome. Okay, this question people don't usually like and they fight it, but I'm going to ask it anyways. You got to name one person, not 20, one person that you're grateful for. I know it's hard. You could think of many people, but today you just get to pick one person in education that you're grateful for. And bonus, if there's a chance they might even be they could hear their name shouted out on the podcast too.
Yep. Okay, I have a list of 5, but I will pick one because
You
you
pick one
gave
of
me the
them.
rules and I'm a rule
Yeah.
follower. And I think just all 5 of mine, I won't talk through, but they're all those mentor folks from my first permanent teaching contract.
Mm,
And
interesting.
so just I think that what that signifies is just the value and the generosity of the teaching profession to contribute and to I think of it so much as an apprenticeship to help teachers go and grow and wanting the best for them as a person, for them as an educator to impact students in great ways. So my one person was a teacher librarian, which I think probably pops up on people's list lots who they go back for their early mentors. Those teacher librarians. Her name is Catherine. She will listen to this because I'll send it to her because and for the same reason she'll listen to it is for the reason the gift that she gave to me, a curiosity and a curiosity about professional growth and professional reflection and modeling how to wonder and reflect on your personal practice and what is impacting and what isn't. And calling things out that don't work, even to an abrasive level, which I liked, not everyone liked, but I, even to this day, appreciate and enjoy that. So I think that's the gift she gave to me.
That's awesome. And just bonus points, my wife is a retired teacher librarian, so she would appreciate that. And again, this idea, when you mentioned before about your advice, you probably used the word about 4 or 5 times now, curiosity, which I think is what I love about that word and that concept is that there is a sort of inferred sense of humility. I don't know all the answers. So I'm wondering, how might this be, right? And I like that approach that allows you an openness to say, I don't know all the things. And so I want to learn and I want to understand. And so I think that, and I also think the last thing when you said about her being maybe sometimes abrasive, you get to be that way when you develop a relationship with someone, right? That's actually is like, I know how when we be authentic, some people are that way. And you don't necessarily have to see that as a negative just because not everybody talks in that way, especially if they've proven themselves to be a trusted colleague and friend.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a really good thing to have. Like I have people in my life who are that way. Like I know when that not everybody's they're going to say it in that way because that's who they are. And I understand how and why, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. And I would suspect she would think that she wasn't good at the relationship piece in some capacity. But I think the reason, and I use the word abrasive, but it's just kind of like that Dr. Phil moment almost. The reason
Yeah,
she could
like
be
you
like
just say what
that.
you want to say. You're not
Yeah.
trying to couch it in any way. I'm just saying what needs to be said here.
She could, yeah, exactly. She had those skills to have those relationships to do that. And so Catherine Drappick, your wife probably knows her because goodness, all of those teacher librarians were connected and still are in some ways sometimes.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. We'll get you out of here real quick here. Just want 3 kind of really bit more rapid fire questions as we go. So what's on your reading list or listening to? And it could be, I usually think about this more on the professional side of it. So it could be that, but if you also have a novel or whatever that you're reading, that's fine too. But what's on your reading list?
I try and find one non-education related novel to tackle a summer. I haven't got there yet, so I haven't met my mandate quite yet.
There's still time.
But you know what? I have a couple authors. I read everything that comes, like Malcolm Gladwell, love. On the education side, everything from Jim Knight. I'm a big Dan Pink fan. Hattie. I read the research notes even, and a colleague that is from the NESD, Katie White, author. I read everything Katie writes as well. And lots more, but those are just definitely on the frequent list for sure. I'm
Nice.
actually I am reading a non-education related book, a bit of a craze, a Mel Robbins Let Them theory
Right.
right now. And I'm also just about done Street Data, which, around that.
Shane Shapir. Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, that's been really good.
Nice. This is a good list. That's a good list. I'll again. I know Katie will listen to the show. Katie and I are actually doing a workshop together coming up in
Oh,
a couple months, so I'm excited about her and I collaborating on some
for
stuff.
for
That'll
sure.
be great.
I didn't ever take Katie time for granted when I got to work with her, and I'm pretty excited anytime I
Nice.
get to have a connect.
Awesome. Okay. What about chill time? I just want to chill, kind of want to, my mind can't be learning all the time. A little bit more on the just binge watching, getaway, escapism, kind of anything that you're watching these days that fits into that category.
I have a baseball nut at home. Dennis and I take in quite a few Blue Jay games on TV, and sometimes we even travel, watch some baseball. I'm not quite as a nut as him, but I do enjoy baseball. And I have two teens at home. There's a variety of law enforcement and medical themes that are watched with my daughter and I. Bryson and I
Okay.
tackle those. Easton and I, more crime based kinds of series is kind of our jam. But he
Nice.
is 17. So watching series with his mom is not.
It's not really.
It probably doesn't make his top 10 right now. But maybe again, we'll pick up a series.
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. So have you watched The Pit?
No,
Did you
I
watch?
haven't, but
Yeah.
it's on the list.
Yeah. It's quite, I mean, I don't watch a ton of medical shows either, but
Yeah.
that one was like, wow, that was
I've
pretty well
heard
done.
good things. We went retro and burned through House
Oh
for
yeah.
last year.
That's it's never been on my list, but it's my sister and brother-in-law's favorite. They just think he's the best.
I don't know if he's the best, but
The best, and as he's the worst. Sort of.
yeah, exactly. I think that summarizes the show, but kind of
Anyway,
interesting. And
yeah,
yeah, easy to chill to, that's for sure.
we gotta have those. All right, last question. Are you based in Yorkton?
No, we are Melfort.
Melfort.
Melfort, yeah.
So give me I'm driving through Melfort. Where should I stop? What should I do?
Almost
Or
all,
regionally. It doesn't have to be there. Whatever you
yeah.
want. However you
You
want to
know
frame it.
what? The small town bakeries. Melfort has a bakery, Nipawin. There's one that just opened up in some areas of Tisdale and our other communities. They are so good. And so I'm a bit of a bakery lover. But I think some of the places people don't know, like we have a ski hill in Saskatchewan. So everyone thinks Prairie's flat, but we, in fact, on the River Valley, Wapiti Valley, have a ski hill. There's a chairlift and everything. And so there's cross-country ski trails in and around, and it's just a beautiful area. In the summertime, you can fish on the river, put your boat in, and take your boat all the way up around through Cadets and Tobin Lake. And so lots of things there. Golf courses, people think of when they think of Saskatchewan a little bit more probably, but outstanding course, the Evergreen in Nipawin, Tisdale, Melfort, all our little communities have some golfing availability. And then I think the other thing that stands out in areas, and it would be the same around Moose Jaw, rural generosity. Anytime there's a little event, we had was called a back alley tour in Melfort that the Northern Lights Gallery, our gallery, had put on, and just put a bunch of vendors together. They had music, they had different community organizations, and it's all of them are just so spectacular. That's just
Yeah.
one of 100 that go on in small town Saskatchewan. You just, anytime you're driving by, if you see a group of cars and just join in, I'm always just amazed at how people just welcome you. And if you're not from the community, they're so excited to show you everything.
Yes.
and
Yeah.
help you out. So, yeah, it's kind of a neat Saskatchewanism.
Stacy, it's been a treat just to talk with you and kind of get to know a little bit more about your background, your career, and the things that are happening in Leeds and Northeast School Division. And so just thank you so much for your time today. This was great.
Fantastic. I'm glad I could be here, and thanks for the ask. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.